The 2013 NBA draft was one of the weirdest drafts we have seen in the 21st century. The tone was set that night when the Cavaliers came out of left field selecting Anthony Bennett with the first overall pick in the draft, and he was out of the league in 4 years. Michael Carter-Williams won Rookie of the Year that season, and not only that, spoiler alert, it turns out the best player in the draft was selected with the 15th pick, and no one could have seen it coming. So now that we're 5 years removed from the 2013 draft, I decided to do a deep dive into all the players who were drafted, undrafted, or drafted and stashed away overseas, and I created a first-round redraft. You could also look at this as a ranking, but I factored in a lot of things like career to this point, production, skill, improvements, weaknesses, etc. I redid the rankings at least 3 times, moving players up and down the list before I nailed down a final draft, and this is what I came up with, ranking them from worst to first. This is the Sly Hooper YouTube channel, and this is how I would redraft the 2013 NBA draft. Isaiah Canaan has bounced around a lot of teams after being picked in the second round of the 2013 draft, and as a Sixer fan, I watched him chuck up a lot of shots on the 10-win team. Canaan is at best a fringe 15th guy on an NBA roster, but when you look at the list of 2013 rookies and try to rank them, the drop-off between Canaan and the next player was pretty huge. At least he was still in the league before getting cut by the Phoenix Suns a few weeks ago. Alex Len was drafted 5th overall by the Phoenix Suns, and really, he just hasn't been that good. He's terrible defensively, shoots way below average for a big, except for last season, and although he is expanding his range with the Hawks, shooting 32% from 3 on 1.8 attempts per game, he is still the same old bad Alex Len, except we now know he is also below average at shooting threes. Solomon Hill is the perfect example of a player who got a nice contract based on one good playoff series. Ever since then, Hill has not only been hurt, he hasn't been a productive player to this point in his career. Man, Ben McLemore was one of my favorite guards in the 2013 draft. Athletic, had a clean shooting stroke, and had bounce off the dribble. He has had a few seasons where he shot the three-pointer at a league average rate, including 1 year where he shot 38%, but if he tries anything else, it's a disaster. And his physical tools have not translated to the defensive end, like, at all. And I'm trying to be as nice as possible. At most, Gorgui Dieng has rounded out to be a rotation big that can hit the occasional mid-range jumper and block a few shots, but that's about it. He kind of peaked in his 3rd season, but he was easily replaceable when head coach Tom Thibodeau had a chance to sign Taj Gibson. Abrines was drafted by the Thunder in the second round of 2013, but he didn't come over to the NBA until the 2016-17 season. He has shown to be a good 3-point shooter off the bench with size, and playing off of Russell Westbrook and then Paul George later in his career has gotten him open looks. He really can't do much of anything else though, and still gets abused on the defensive end. Ian Clark was able to carve out a nice role on the Golden State Warriors, but his numbers might have been inflated on that team even for a role player. His one skill, 3-point shooting, has gone down since he joined the Pelicans last season, and his lack of size allows him to get picked on by opposing offenses. He is a nice 11th man to have on your roster, you know, someone who could maybe change the tone of a random game in December. Mike Muscala has kind of turned himself into a playable rotation big. He is a big whose sole purpose is really to stretch the floor. He is too slow laterally to keep up with today's NBA power forwards, and he can't guard centers, but if you give him 15 minutes per game, he can give you quality spacing for your offense. Troy Daniels has also bounced around on some teams, but he is basically a hired gun to come off the bench. He will always shoot 40% from 3, but he will shoot terribly at every other spot on the court. He is a replacement level rotation player that's a very good shooter on your roster, and compared to the bottom 6 of this redraft, that's actually a success. This is where the redraft kind of picks up. After Bullock was traded to the Pistons, he became the 3-point shooter we saw at North Carolina, and part of that was more playing opportunity. He got the starting spot on Detroit last year, and he has become a weapon to use on offense. With his size, he can catch and shoot off screens, and spot up. Bullock has turned himself into a nice role player a lot of teams could use. Tony Snell pretty much couldn't figure out what he was until he was traded to the Milwaukee Bucks. He became your standard solid 3-and-D wing. Overall, he is a credible wing defender that won't get destroyed on every possession, and he can shoot 40% from 3. That's the type of plug-and-play role player that teams value. I think ultimately Cody Zeller's destiny is a spot starter, but someone who can be an energy big off the bench. He scores efficiently, although it's on really low volume. He's an okay passer, a subpar rebounder, and an okay defender. He is someone who definitely belongs in an NBA rotation, which I guess at this stage in the draft is all you could really ask for. I can only move Trey Burke up so far because of the resurgent year he had with the Knicks last season, but he seemed to figure some stuff out. At the same time, I can't ignore the first 4 years of his career. We still don't even know if last year was real or just an aberration. He is playing 20 minutes per game for a terrible team, but at the very least, he has shown he could be a spark plug scorer off the bench. Curry took a while to round into form. He started to get real minutes for the Sacramento Kings in 2015-16. Then he had the best season of his career in the 2016-17 season, averaging 12 points per game while posting a 60.1 true shooting percentage, but leg injuries derailed him last season. I would still draft Curry this high because he is a great shooter and shot a high percentage from every spot on the floor in his last healthy season. Every team could absolutely use a guard like him in the rotation. Dedmon is the perfect backup big for every team. He plays hard, he rebounds well in the limited minutes he's given, and he is efficient whenever he has scoring opportunities. Dedmon is just going to have a long career as a rotational big, and finding guaranteed rotation players is a successful late pick. Allen Crabbe turned himself into a nice guard off the bench after carving a little bit of a path in Portland. Crabbe then got paid and then was traded a season later to the Brooklyn Nets. His contract is absolutely an overpay, but if we're just looking at talent here in the redraft, Crabbe is a decent-sized guard that has shot over 38% from 3 over the last 3 seasons, so you can run some offensive sets to get him open. Mason Plumlee has actually become a solid big. Denver has found use for him, playing him as the backup 5 and alongside Jokic in some lineups. Plumlee is a good passer, athletic, and solid on defense, racking up blocks and steals while only playing 19 minutes per game. He has shot a great percentage from 2-point range over the last few seasons as well. Plumlee isn't a world beater, but he is definitely a solid role player. Olynyk is one of those low-usage players you can plug and play in a lot of lineups because of his ability to stretch the floor at the center position. Olynyk is a career 37% three-point shooter, and he rebounds at a good rate considering he comes off the bench. He is also a net positive on defense. Roberson still can't shoot a lick, but there is no denying that he is an elite defender and impacts the game in a significant way. Just look at the Thunder's defensive numbers last season when he was on the court versus off. I do wonder how he'll look this season when he comes back from his knee injury. He has already suffered setbacks in his rehab, but he impacts winning basketball on one end of the floor. KCP is one of those players who sounds like he is good in theory, but is actually not as good as you'd think. However, he does fill the role of 3-and-D guard in a solid way, and you can plug him into any lineup. That value alone puts him at this spot for me. Dennis Schroeder might have found his calling as an overqualified backup point guard for the Thunder. He started a lot of games for the Hawks the last 2 seasons after Jeff Teague went to the Timberwolves, and while his scoring numbers were inefficient during the regular season, he has had big moments in the playoffs for the Hawks. The reason I ultimately put Tim Hardaway Jr. over Schroeder is basically because of his ability to shoot. Hardaway has become a good scorer for the Knicks, although, again, the Knicks are a bad team, but that horrible contract at least looks a little bit better. I think on a good team his efficiency could spike. His true shooting percentage has taken a dip since leaving Atlanta, but he is asked to do a lot more on the Knicks. Nerlens Noel had a weird time in Dallas, but he has rediscovered himself in Oklahoma City this season. He only plays 14 minutes per game, but in Nerlens fashion, he is back to racking up steals, deflections, and blocks in a short amount of time. He also finishes everything around the rim, catches lobs, and he improved his free throw percentage every season. He can fit in a switching scheme as well. Nerlens is an impact utility big that every team should have. Otto Porter has improved every single year since he has gotten into the league. I think the perception of him as a player is skewed because of the big contract he has with the Wizards, but he is what you look for typically in a wing on the offensive end. He can score efficiently from every level of the floor, and the last 2 seasons he has shot over 43% from 3. Plus, he is also a solid rebounder. He is okay defensively, but he at least tries on that end, or at least he did try when the Wizards were actually a playoff team and not the complete trash fire that they are now. And as an aside, I actually think the Kings or the Pelicans would be a good landing spot in an Otto Porter trade. Robert Covington went undrafted in 2013 and played only 7 games for the Rockets in the 2013-14 season. With the Sixers in the midst of their tanking, then general manager Sam Hinkie signed Robert Covington before the 2014-15 season. And with all the reps starting for the Sixers, Covington turned himself into one of the best 3-and-D wings in the NBA. At 6'9", he shoots league average from 3 on a good number of attempts, and on defense he switches 1 through 4, and he's an off-ball menace. He has turned himself into an elite defender, as he has been among the league leaders in steals and deflections. Covington for some reason became a divisive figure among the Sixers internet fandom, but you can ask the Minnesota Timberwolves fans how Covington has changed their team since he got traded there. He is a transferable player, a guy you could just plug into any team to make open shots and play elite defense. His value impacting winning on a game is the reason I have him 6th. CJ McCollum has turned into an important dance partner for Damian Lillard in Portland. Those two have formed a dynamic backcourt, and they play off each other well. CJ can play off-ball, run pick and roll, and he can score from all 3 levels of the court. He has gotten better defensively, but he could still be exploited on switches due to his size. Over the last 4 seasons, however, McCollum has been dropping 22 points per game in his sleep. And to boot, he's an underrated playmaker. While there is the question of can McCollum be the best player on a championship team, I think he can be the 2nd or 3rd banana on a championship team no problem. I think Steven Adams is one of the more underrated bigs in the NBA, and I know putting him above CJ McCollum might be a problem for some. To me though, Adams brings more value on both sides of the court. Yeah, McCollum might be the better offensive player, but Adams is also a solid defender, a solid rim protector, he rotates well, plus he's strong as an ox. And on the offensive end, he doesn't get to show his skill because he has either played with Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant, or Russell Westbrook and Paul George. He is fine doing all the dirty work, and I think that hides his ability as an offensive player. Adams is also an elite offensive rebounder. I do always wonder what it would be like if Adams had been drafted by a different team. The reason I went with Rudy Gobert over Steven Adams is because of Gobert's defensive prowess. Adams in my mind is the better offensive player, and he's a very good defender in his own right, but Gobert's defense is transformative. Over the last 2 seasons, the Utah Jazz defense has ranked in the top 3 and ranked in the top 8 in the 2015-16 season, and Gobert is pretty much the catalyst for that. Gobert has a Defensive Player of the Year award under his belt, and he might win one more when it's all said and done. If we're talking about the first 4 seasons of Oladipo's career, he still would have been drafted in the top 6 for this redraft. He could defend, and his scoring efficiency was improving slightly every year, but he was being miscast as a point guard in Orlando, and then was basically given the scraps left over from the Westbrook triple-double extravaganza in OKC. Even so, I don't think I would have had him at 2 if he didn't break out the way he did last season. Oladipo really became one of the best 2-way players in the NBA, and even though he won the Most Improved Player award, I still think we undersold how much of a star he actually became. He is a go-to scorer, a good playmaker, and an incredible defender. Basically, his jump last season from slightly above average guard who is a good defender to a full-blown 2-way star is the reason I have him over Adams, Gobert, and even McCollum. And that brings us to the very clearly most obvious choice at number 1 in this redraft. Giannis is one of the most unique players I have ever seen, and he has firmly been a top 7 or 8 NBA player for 3 seasons now, and this year, he is my frontrunner for MVP. To have a tier 1 player like Giannis come literally out of nowhere really highlights just how bizarre this draft was. Giannis was invisible to the world before that draft and looked like a project when he was picked 15th by the Bucks. The only footage there was of Giannis playing basketball overseas looked like he was in a YMCA gym with 8th graders. Then he grew from 6'11" after he was drafted and went from a skinny twig to more than 250 pounds. Now he is averaging 27 points per game, 13 rebounds, and 6 assists while shooting 66% from 2 and shooting 78% at the rim. Giannis is dominating despite not being able to shoot threes, which if he ever does shoot threes even at a 30% clip, well, it's over. It's not often you look back at a draft class and the #1 pick or the player who won Rookie of the Year from that class aren't even in the redraft, but this is still one of the strangest drafts I can remember. If you agree or disagree with the rankings or just think I'm an idiot who doesn't know anything about basketball, leave a comment in the section below, give the video a like, and if you like hoops and like talking hoops, subscribe to the channel, and thanks for the support.